GM, everyone. Welcome to yet another DeNites. This one already started. It's the first one that actually happened during the day with limited seat co-work. Hopefully the people who were part of that had some fun and actually were able to deliver some work and not only party. So we have a difficult job because we're standing in between the work day and the drinks and food and drinks. So we'll try to have a very productive conversation on DAOs and the role of DAOs in the future of work. And let me just introduce myself, and then I'll give you folks a couple of minutes to do a proper intro on who you are, where you're based, what's the first DAO you joined, all that things. So about myself, my name is Pedro. I'm one of the founders and CEO at Talent Protocol, which is a Web3 professional community. We're building a space where Web3 builders and builders that are joining the Web3 world can grow their careers, whether it's through mentoring, jobs, opportunities, and just building a support network around them. The way we started was by building essentially a DeFi for talent, so you could launch your own token and build an economy around you as a talent. And enough about myself. I think we're here also to hear you guys' opinions. So Kathy, thanks for joining us. Can you give us like a 2-minute pitch about you? Please.
Absolutely. So, hi everyone, really great to be here. It's nice to see that we managed to find 1 or 2 women to join the audience. I was feeling a bit lonely there for a second. So, I'm Kathy. I'm the European Research Area Chair in blockchain at Instituto Superior Técnico. I lead a lab there for blockchain for social good and sustainability. And I've been in Portugal since about last September. Prior to that, I was working at Imperial College in London. I've been working with blockchain and associated digital technologies in a research context since about 2009, but I've had a 25-year career in technology prior to that. World Economic Forum Fellow for Crypto Impact, Sustainability and Acceleration. So we're trying to ensure that cryptocurrencies and associated DeFi technologies are done in a sustainable and socially good manner. And I think that's about it from me.
Do you remember the first DAO you ever joined?
Yeah, it was called the Chaos DAO. So it was, someone called me up and said, come and join this crazy DAO. It was the guy, I don't know how old, you're probably all way too young to remember, but if you remember the Icon has cheeseburger meme, do you remember the guy who did Icon has cheeseburger? He called me up and said, join this DAO, so I did. Okay. And it is a chaos.
All right, Minj, can you do the same exercise, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Mendez. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Avenue. Avenue is a Web3 startup that is looking to build a collaborative space for DAOs. So kind of trying to make sense of the mess that Discord is right now. And that's pretty much our beta. So if you want to take part, go to avenue.place. And hopefully we'll, over time, be able to show you a better future and a better place for you to do your best work within DAOs. And the first DAO that I ever joined, I was trying to recall, it was either Developer DAO or Crypto Society. I think it was Crypto Society. It was really fun. Like, I just saw a tweet and it was about a bunch of people getting together to study the impact of Web3 in culture and society at large. So I was just like, yeah, sounds like the right amount of craziness with the right amount of learning resources. Sign me up for that. And yeah, that's how I got into the adventure of DAOs.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, DAO means Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I actually have a question for the audience. Can you raise your hand if you have ever joined a DAO? Okay, so suspicious audience. So we have to be on our A game. But I have to ask, how I think many of us raise their hands, but if I ask individually one-on-one, tell me what a DAO is, I would get very different answers. So I want to ask you, like, how do you explain to your parents, Minj, what a DAO is?
Okay, good question. I'd probably say that it's a bunch of weirdos on the internet that have money to spend and they really want to do something. So I think that's pretty much an overarching vision. At least my mom would understand that clearly and would probably be crazy enough to say, here's like €5, sign me up for that.
Katie, how would you do that? I mean, on a more serious note, how would you explain what a DAO is?
How do I explain what a DAO is? Really, I talk about DAOs from the context of organizational structures. So if you think about the fact that with the Industrial Revolution, what we saw was the creation of a new type of industrial organization. It was called the factory. Over time, over the last 100 years or so, we've seen the development of something called the globalized multinational corporation. A decentralized autonomous organization is really just another way for people to collaborate and work together and to produce things of value. Currently, it's just been used for investment stuff, but that's a different thing.
And okay, besides the investment stuff, why do we need DAOs? I think this is it's a pretty straightforward question.
But I'm going to be cheeky back,
yes,
Pedro, because it's at the end of the day. So do we actually need DAOs? Would be my question. Or should I refine the question? Do we need DAOs in the form that we're currently seeing them today? I think there's a huge amount of potential in the concept of decentralized organization. So, for example, we're doing some research together with Imperial College in London, and we're looking at how we can use DAOs to finance critical infrastructure in a new and innovative way, in a way that's decentralized and actually helps the world cope with climate change. I think what we're seeing in today's world, although it's a lot of fun, it's great fun to see a lot of the different things that are coming out on the DAOs, what we're currently seeing are people are using DAOs to just make money. So they're creating all these weird synthetic instruments in a DAO format, and I'm sort of like, well, what's the actual point of that? So my question back to you is, do we actually need DAOs? Probably not. What do you think?
I love that. I actually think we need new ways of work. We need to change the way that talent exists in our society and talent performs in our society. We have been talent even before the Industrial Revolution. We've been in a society that is employer driven and that is revenue driven. I would love to see us moving towards a society that is talent driven and ownership driven. I think DAOs play a role in this shift. But yeah, this is more like a philosophical conversation about HR technology and talent, which DAOs overlap that. I have a question. Like, obviously, you believe in DAOs. I mean, you're building a startup in the space, right?
I'd say so. Yeah,
correct?
That's fair to say.
All right. So, if you had to pick one DAO, like that, I know you already mentioned one, the first one that you joined, but not that. If you had to pick one DAO that would serve as a benchmark to all of us, what would that be?
I would pick this one that I said before because it's the opposite of the answer that I gave when I explained what a DAO was. So it's fun and all to say that DAOs are a way to spend money with a bunch of random people, but they actually have a purpose. And I'm more drawn towards the type of DAOs that don't stick to the mission that is, just around almost managing a treasury. How do we, maximize our profits in any type of way? So going back to that example, Crypto Society is sort of more of a learning DAO, which you can actually make use of the instruments that they're playing, make use of the community to to propagate impact across a number of areas. So you'd have people talking about and thinking about, public goods and sharing knowledge, which is important, but also around liberal arts, which again it touches the same with public goods. But you don't have financial incentives for this kind of thinking and this type of organizations in the more traditional world. And I think DAOs play a role in that, helping us align principles that as an industrial society, we tend to shun away from because we're mostly economically driven. And now we found a way to bring that into the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of science, the pursuit of arts. So that's a kind of part of my interest in DAOs is centered around that as well. So I think I'd go with Crypto Society to answer your question.
And Kathy, I'm going to ask the same. I mean, you mentioned Chaos DAO. Is that like your benchmark for DAOs, or would you pick another one?
I would say, actually, you know, I'm quite pragmatic about these things. I'd choose a DAO that actually has an interest for you. So, you know, choose a DAO that firstly is people that seem to be doing sensible things, but also potentially have same interests as you do. That's what I would recommend to anyone. I don't give any particular, in particular, I don't give investment advice. I'll put that straight up now. You know, I think it's interesting, however, to sort of again think about what we've actually seen on the DAOs, and you've probably seen the same thing here. You know, everyone was raving about the decentralized autonomous organization. We've got 1,500 people here on a DAO. Isn't it great? You know, what happens over time, not everybody has the time to vote. You suddenly realize that there's a group of people who are doing all the voting. They get annoyed because they're actually doing most of the work. And then what happens? So they all say, well, we need to get a core group of people who are actually going to manage the treasury. So I'm sitting there going, so you need a CFO. You know, and then what happens? They need someone who's going to be creating membership. So you need a CMO, a chief marketing officer. You need a CEO. And the irony for me watching what happened on most of the DAOs was they actually centralized pretty quickly. They're not decentralized organizations.
That was going to be my comment. It doesn't sound that much decentralized after a while. Interesting to see, like you mentioned, the voting. And I don't have I have the questions here, but let's go freestyle for a little bit. Man, just on the voting side, this is not the first time I hear about this. You know, a community that is like super hyped up in the beginning, and then there's not that much participation. How do you think about this from an incentives point of view, or from any other point of view?
I'm going to be shilling here a little bit about Avenue, but that's one of the problems that we see happening again and again. I completely agree with the description that Kathy just said about DAOs centralizing, but I think that they're molded by the tools and the environment that they are fostered in. So there are very few DAOs that actually achieve a functional team that is decentralized and emergent, where the decision-making process happens at the fringes. It comes from the members first and not a classic top-down approach. And what we see happening is that tools tend to mold DAOs in this way. People start a DAO, first thing that they do, spin up a Discord server because they need to have a place to coordinate and to collaborate. And that immediately is going into a paradigm that I'd say 99% of the DAOs don't go past that, just because they're setting up channels. So you need someone who's in charge to do that. It's super tricky to keep track of everything that leads to a drop in engagement. Then you need a specialized team to propel the DAO forward. Everything just starts to snowball, and most DAOs can't find mechanisms to move past that and move into a completely bottom-up approach. What we see happening with, I'm going to use this term, but this isn't necessarily what I want to say. So what we see happening with successful DAOs that achieve that emergent structure, is that they organize themselves with workarounds around the tools to actually empower the members, empower the team, and foster a space where people can just get together, have an idea, and say, yeah, this sounds like the mission that we're doing here. Let's work together for this. And one of the problems in tools is that this working together defaults to building in an open channel. This immediately is a problem because building in an open channel isn't necessarily positive. It's stifling collaboration. You can't coordinate hundreds of people. The way you do that is empowering smaller groups, specialized groups that are going to come up with a solution and float that back to the DAO. That's kind of what we're going for with Avenue, and we see this pattern happening again and again. And a good example that I have is actually Kraus House. They're a DAO. For those of you who don't know, they want to buy an NBA team. They might just be crazy enough to do it because they bought Ball Hogs, a 3v3 team, a professional team. And they did this amazing event in NYC. That was done like by just a bunch of people outside of the main DAO, still belonging to the DAO, but working on their own with a certain budget. They did all the work for that, and then they gave the results back to the DAO, had one of the most amazing events. And I particularly like this event because Krause House isn't a traditional DAO, so to speak. They're not investment, they're not service focused. They are just a bunch of people who want to, who love basketball and want to buy a team. It's the craziest sense of the word. And they achieve that step where they're organizing themselves to foster this type of emergent behavior. So that's kind of what I see. The main barriers for DAOs, for engagement, for voting, is just the way that they're molded right from the get-go. That builds this sort of top-down structure instead of a bottom-up decision-making process at the fringes and not at the core.
Yeah, I think in terms of Krause House DAO, they have like a super well-defined mission, and it also brings this like basketball fans into it. So it's a certain type of people, and I think that also helps. Not only all the DAO structures or lack of structures that they set up, but also that helps. I actually have two shout-outs for DAOs that I think are relevant to this conversation. One of them, you mentioned investment DAOs before, so we were invested by Global Coin Research, which is a investment DAO, and they essentially have like a leadership team, and each member on that core team has different roles. So they have a couple people on research, like looking into DAOs, so they reach out to us to invest. And then that's when it becomes interesting because the investment process is done through the DAO. So you have to do a pitch on their Discord server, and then they'll have a vote on how much, if they are investing, and then how much. It was very interesting to see that process happening. Obviously, in our situation, they come up with a number, and then I said, well, you cannot go that much. You can only go to this certain type number, and we had a bit of negotiation there. But I saw that okay, the leadership team is really relevant, but they did it as a community, and that was really interesting to see. The second one is I really like their transparency, and also shout out for the ladies in the audience. It's called Boys Crypto Club. I really love their community, and especially their podcast is super amazing. It's one of the best podcasts I hear, and essentially they are figuring this out in public, and they're putting all their challenges, all their uncertainties and troubles in public. It's really interesting to see. So definitely, and their goal is to bring in more ladies into the Web3 space. So I think it's a very noble goal. And yeah, so check those two out. I had one question. Like we kind of like went around it, but I want to go and ask the questions directly. So what could leadership look like within a DAO? I just mentioned a couple of two types of leadership. Like let's try to think about like in a 5-year timeline. What are we looking at, Kathy?
Sorry, I'm doing this to all your questions, aren't I? I'm going to turn them around a little bit. So one of the things that I think we have problems with in the DAOs is the fact that it's all financially motivated. The problem is, and the problem becomes an eternal problem within DAOs, that there are financial incentives. Most of the voting ends up being around who has the most voting power, right? Who can buy the most voting power. There are some workarounds on that, but to be honest, I'm not that impressed by the workarounds either. So is there a fundamental way to rethink what value is? If you think about cryptocurrency, what we could have done before creating DAOs is actually challenge the entire notion of what is money. Instead, what we've done is taken what could have been a really subversive and archaic technology. You can see my leanings here, it's becoming obvious. But we could have taken that technology, we could have taken it and actually challenged some of the fundamental basis of society. And instead what we've done is recreate effectively organizational structures using DAOs. So my question would be, what does leadership look like within a DAO, what it could look like, is it's going to end up, if we follow the track we're on today, it's going to end up looking a lot like corporate governance. And I know nobody here wants to really hear that, and I'm sorry if I'm the bearer of bad news, but that's how it's going to go if you keep going along this particular track. There's still an opportunity to rethink leadership, but actually why don't, if you're talking about how you manage and control talent, isn't there a better way to think about that rather than having someone lead that talent?
I mean, in the future, like this is my vision for visions. You know, they usually don't go as you want them to. But the way I see is like a disaggregation of talent and work. So we would stop having employees and employers.
What would you have instead, though?
Just like people doing stuff and
so
getting whatever they like or they don't like or they have to do,
Yeah, okay.
and then paying each other. So I would see like a complete disaggregation of work.
See, but you know what that actually is? That's actually going right back to the origins of the capitalist economy. That's what was happening at the beginning of the capitalist economy, actually all the way up to the Victorian era. If you think about the fact that, you know, people who went to work on the docks. So my great-grandfather worked on the docks in Wales. He had to take his own tools to work with him. So, and effectively they were on day-to-day contracts. They rented their time out, and whoever was organising that work group paid them. How is what you're suggesting different, except that it's digitally mediated?
I don't know that much about the Victorian age to comment on
I've
that.
had too much time on my hand to read.
I'll take your word. I'll take your word for it. You know, not only the differences, the tools, everything that humans have evolved from that age until this age. Hopefully, I think we've evolved. I think that the biggest difference is on what I mentioned before, from revenue to ownership. How that looks like remains to be seen.
So one final question, sorry to sort of,
right.
yeah. The organizational principles of capitalism and the large-scale corporates that we have today, one of the reasons for them is the centralization of decision-making over what happens in the economic system. In a world where everybody is decentralized, which I actually tend to also, by the way, agree with. I like the concept, I like the idea.
It's a vision only.
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
vision. It's a utopian vision.
Yes.
Who's making the decision over how resources, finances, and all of those things get allocated in the economy? Who makes the decision about what a group of people are going to work towards?
What if everyone had their own economy?
Okay, everyone has their own economy. So I could have a socialist economy if I wanted to. You could have a capitalist one.
You could have NFTs, I could have social tokens, and we can exchange them for work or
But then there's a joint
knowledge.
economy there, isn't there? There has to be. Then there's an exchange. If there's sorry, now I'm getting
It
into
doesn't
the
have to be an
economics.
exchange. It doesn't have to be.
True.
Doesn't have to
Okay. I still would love to see the model. So let's say food production. Let's say the basics of human activity. How are you going to go about coordinating who plants, who waters, who reaps the crops, who turns it into wheat, who turns that into flour, who turns it into food?
But the thing is, like, in the past, we've done that, let's say, in a more centralized manner. Mm-hmm. So you have different classes, and let's say upper classes were defining that, whether it was monarchy. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the UK it still is, but they don't have any power left, I guess.
They have all the money though, and all the land,
some
technically.
Money, yes. Do they have crypto though?
Probably, knowing them.
The Queen should launch her own
Queen
economy, by the way.
Queen coin.
No, but joking aside, I think that everything in the past has been built with that hierarchy somehow. Different societies, different cultures did their own thing. I mean, if you compare Portuguese culture with, let's say, more Nordic culture, it's done in an entirely different way. Even until today, even today is done in a different way. That I would see this happening is it would have to be some sort of self-governance. It's really weird to say this, but if you need some tool for agriculture or whatever, and you need like 4 or 5 people, how do we build the tools? And then, you know, people like you that are building tools for DAOs, how do we build the tools to help them self-govern themselves? It starts to look like a lot like a collective of sorts. I mean, I know a lot of people who have done collectives for like design and research, not that much, but design and software development work. And they somehow would share clients and work, but in a very informal sometimes way. I've seen clubs as well, which could be, it's closer to what we're going for. Materialistically, I don't know what this would look like, but it's homework for me to think about it.
I mean, I think it's a super exciting concept and idea, and don't get me wrong, I think about this a lot myself, right? So, and we ended up sort of solely focusing on, well, if we can solve the problem of critical infrastructure and critical services, then other things can be built around the edges of that.
Yeah, and I guess with DAO tooling, I've heard a joke the other day, you know, we have more DAO tools than DAOs, but I think it's innovation waves. I mean, it's part of, I think you were giving us like a view of this space where, I mean, we can go this way or that way, you know, or sorry, pardon my French, either we fuck it up and we become the next corporates, or we can still go in this big vision direction. How are you helping us hopefully go in this big vision direction?
So before answering that, I think I need to take a step back and share a bit my vision around DAOs so that it becomes a bit clearer. So I don't see DAOs as in what we now call DAOs as the future. I think they're just a stepping stone and let's call it an evolutionary chain. So I think they're going to end up merging sometime along the way with online communities in one path. So that's one path of that evolutionary tree. And you can see this already happening with at least the need for it. I'm going to give 2 examples, open source communities and gaming communities. So open source lives off of free labor most of the time, or people sponsoring open source maintainers. And contrary to the belief, the idea that open source is democratic, that there's a lingering idea in the background that open source is democratic, it's not necessarily, because there's a core team that makes the decisions, and a lot of times you have a benevolent dictator behind the scenes, so it's not really a democracy. And when you apply a DAO-like structure to this, with the right incentives, you get people getting rewarded for their work, and they should, because they're, you know, if I'm developing, even if it's just a library for a particular open source language, I'm increasing the value of that language, but the only value that I get is on a personal reputation side, and even that, most of the time, is just an empty promise. So I think that open source communities would benefit from a DAO-like structure, but it wouldn't be what DAOs are right now. I don't have an answer for this, Link, but there's a need, and I believe that somewhere along the way, we're going to figure out how to cross that bridge. The other is for gaming communities. So, you know, games are launched by a publisher, and then you have entire communities building mods. Those mods, a lot of times, influence the decision of people buying the game, because it's they're augmenting the world that they're playing. And whoever, you know, builds those mods, they can't, you know, distribute it legally. They live off of donations most of the time, and again, it works in a reputational sense behind the scenes, because people build mods thinking that it's going to give them a good break for a gaming studio, but you're increasing the value of the game without getting anything back. So again, there's a bridge here to cross in terms of community that would benefit from a DAO-like structure, where everyone in this ecosystem would benefit from, you know, the work off of each other. And the other branch of this evolutionary tree that I see happening is towards the labor market. So on one side you have companies with this top-down structure, you know, a CEO, a board of directors, and all that. And on the other side, you almost have freelance, developers or contractors or whatever, where you kind of work for the clients that you want. You have a ton of freedom to do what you want, but you still have a lot of legwork to do yourself. DAOs can evolve to something in the middle where you're still protected, so to speak, by a structure where you fit in. You still have a lot of the benefits of belonging to a company. At least you can have a bit of recurring income because you're sharing in the profits of that quote-unquote DAO, but you'd still be able to carry out the work that you want to. So there's a gap in there that I think DAOs are going to evolve to fulfill, and that takes us to the future of labor. So what I actually believe is going to happen to DAOs, and at least DAO tools, is that right now we're in this huge wave of innovation. Eventually we're going to have to take a step back, because just by innovating, you're not going to cross those bridges to online communities, to labor. You're going to have to incorporate principles from the old world, from the corporate world. You're going to have to take a step back and understand what are the legal frameworks for this? What am I able to do? How am I able to bring this DAO to their mission? So it was kind of a twist on your question, but hopefully it paints a bit of a picture.
It's a more concrete vision on the future of work and how DAOs can, at least in the gaming industry and open source. Interestingly enough, one of the reasons why open source appeared, if you read one of Linus' papers, was essentially if you have company A and company B, and you have this like professional on company A and this other on company B, imagine you have a huge problem on company A, and the best person to solve that problem would be on company B. For legal reasons and contract reasons, it's not going to happen. But with open source, the hope was, if it's open source, then we can all collaborate. So the essence was already there. Did it work? For some things, it did. It did. When Microsoft is going open source in some things, I think we've done some great progress. Actually, you were talking, my mind was generating like hundreds of questions. I'll try to stick to, I think we have to go through the essential things. Like, what are like in your opinion, like the 3 or more or less essential features of a DAO? Let's just say we want to set up DeNites DAO, which I'll talk more about it after the panel. Let's say we wanted to do that. What would be the essential features to do that?
Easy. Avenue.
All right, let's chat. You should be a sponsor, by the way.
Yeah, let's talk about that after.
But yeah, concretely, like let's say, obviously a mission, obviously some sort of community rallied behind the mission, I guess. What would be the other things?
Yeah, I'm gonna steer completely away from DAO tooling in this sense. I just wanted to make the joke, but I think that for the beginning, there needs, at least right now, there needs to be a bit of an artificial inflation of the community. So you need a very strong team. You can call it a core team if you want. You need to put those social structures in place before you can hand them off. But I think that a lot of DAOs also fail handing that off, and people linger too much. So it's kind of almost a social contract that you have to do between everyone involved in the beginning. So that's one thing. The other is a very good and diverse network. So you want to source the biggest amount of talent that you can get your hands on, but also the most diverse opinions. Before reaching a goal, before converging, you need to diverge. And DAOs is as healthy as the divergent opinions that they can generate, because you're pushing the boundaries of creativity, of innovation within the DAO and within that mission. And for the final one, you said mission, but you already said it, but I'm just gonna underline that, because after diverging, you need to converge. You need to figure out what the limits are. You need to have something that is clear enough that you can say, well, we just came up with this whole bunch of ideas. These 3 or 4 are outside of the scope, and it's important for DAOs to be very, strict about it, because if you start diverging too much, your DAO is gonna wobble through 5 or 6 different concepts and spend a lot of time and generate a lot of frustration in their members before settling in one common objective. So a very strong mission and people committed to that mission, so that they can converge after diverging.
Is there any question for both of you? Any sort of smart contract or governance, on-chain governance that is needed for a DAO? I mean, as an essential feature.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the things that we've actually been working on quite a lot recently, in particular when you're thinking about if you're going to do governance for water infrastructure, for example, if you're going to govern using DeFi and DAO sort of mechanisms, how people get their water, then you need very clear sort of voting and governance mechanisms. I think there's a huge amount of work to be done in that space. I think we actually currently don't have the governance models that are really required to make DAOs work effectively for everybody. So that for me is a very open research space, which is exciting as a researcher. And we have been working on some of those governance mechanisms, which we will be publishing later this year. The one thing that I think, however, is really needed for DAOs, in particular if you want a wide and diverse network of people, is usability. The usability of DAOs today, quite frankly, is dire. It's horrifically bad. I remember, so when, just a short point on usability, I started with blockchain in about 2009. I was very early to the research sort of space, and I've worked in it for, well, all the way up until now. When I moved to Portugal, however, it was the very first time in my life that I ever needed to buy cryptocurrency. Previously, we just mined, and we mined and mined and mined and mined, and we had tons of crypto to do student projects with. And I had to buy crypto to join this DAO that someone had invited me to join. The process of buying cryptocurrency and getting that into a DAO is literally mind-bendingly bad. It's horrifically bad. It's really built by geeks for geeks, and I say that as a geek. So, if you really want widely used DAOs, then accessibility, usability is probably one of the primary concerns. So, I literally thought I'd lost £1,500 at one point in time. And even though I'd been working in the space since 2009 and I have 3 degrees in engineering, I literally, 2 degrees in engineering, 1 in economics, I literally didn't know where the money had gone. I didn't know. And to me, that's horrifying. I can't ask someone who is, for example, not everyone is trained in computer science, and nor should they be. That would be a really boring world. So we have to work on understanding, go and look at traditional finance, go and look at fintech, go and look at the user journey that they are putting out there for the customers. So, at least they know where that 1,500 quid is. I found it at the end, obviously, but it was kind of like, it was a real mind twist for me to actually think about where it had gone. So that's my tip for your DAO, your DeNites DAO.
I guess you guys are kind of fixing this.
I hope so, yeah. No,
yeah, that's what everyone says. I hope someone's fixing that.
No, I hope we're fixing this. I can't underline this enough. Even today when we, a big part for us at Avenue is about partnerships, and sometimes we see people going through their platforms, and I literally, I'm going to confess this, I get lost way more often than I want to, because it's just too complicated. It's just, if I can't, you made the joke in the beginning, but if you can't explain it to one of your parents, it means just that the space is not there yet. And there's that's why there's so much funding for infrastructure. The infrastructure is not there yet. The space is so nascent that we need to overcome these limitations that are built by engineers. And to be honest, this is one of the hardest areas to solve the problem, because it's so hardcore engineering and built by so many engineers that at this point the usability aspect is so lagging behind that we have a ton of tech debt to cover. But hopefully Avenue can help in that. At least we have one of the co-founders, Rafael, is a designer, and he spends a lot of his days tilting about products that have a terrible usability experience, and it's one of the best things about us is having someone like Rafael since the birth of Avenue.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not a DAO specific problem. It's a Web3 specific or wide problem. And actually, I have a follow-up question I think goes really well in the follow-up of this conversation, which is, how will DAOs like cooperate with Web 2 or Web 1 or Web 0 or non-Web 3 organizations? I mean, if we have this lack of usability or bad usability, how is this going to happen? I mean,
in my opinion, I kind of have already answered this. I think that DAOs are, a stepping stone in that evolutionary chain, where you're going to end up in a point where you don't even distinguish anymore between a classic Web 2 company or Web 2 product, between a Web 3 or DAO or whatever, because they're so intertwined, and we've covered so much ground in this tech debt that it's become indistinguishable. So that's kind of my opinion.
It's like having a LLC, like a limited liability company, and then you have a DAO, but that's just, whatever, right?
Yeah, but again, I just want to underline this. I don't think it will be DAOs as we know it. I don't know exactly what it will be, because it's going to be shaped by regulations and whoever in governments comes up against this and tries to regulate it. But I think it's going to be what we're going to call DAOs then, and what DAOs are going to.
I was counting the minutes until someone said regulation, and I have a follow-up question to that as well. I'm very well prepared as a moderator, as you can see. So, and actually, we were talking about your great-grandfather working at the dock. So some people might argue that DAOs have compensation structures that are similar to those of gig economies, which may threaten or may not threaten labor rights. Any thoughts on this?
Well, I think the gig economy already is threatening labour rights. I think that's why we've seen so many court cases globally about that. So, for example, Uber in the UK were forced to treat their drivers as though they were actually employees. And I think there is a space here for regulation to think about how are you actually going to cover the costs of social care in society. One of the big issues is, of course, taxation. So we're seeing a lot of moves from the OECD and a global move towards, interoperable tax systems. That will be one thing that I think is very important. But also, if we're talking about self-governance, you need self-regulation. And you need to understand what that actually implies and means. So if you're talking about DAOs to be the interface between Web 3 and Web 2 and traditional corporations, then effectively that DAO is going to need to manage the insurance, it's going to need to manage the healthcare, it's going to need to manage all the things that are traditionally organised by a corporation and provide that to the members of the DAO. So there's lots of things to think through here, and it's all about the renegotiation of the social contract. Not just with employees and employers, but it's actually about the social contract between citizen and government as well. Unless you want a DAO as a government.
There's been some work on that as a nation-state DAOs.
Nation-state DAOs, yeah.
Yeah, which would be, well, it's an interesting space on its own. I'm running out of questions. I have like a macro question, which is, how DAOs are going to shape the job market. I mean, we kind of covered it already. I feel like there's still not like job boards or the Web3 way of doing job search for DAOs yet. There's some things appearing, but we're not there yet. But job market is a lot more than just recruitment. Okay. So do you have any final thoughts on this one, or can I move to my last question?
I'd just probably add that it's, as an ecosystem, we're going in stages. So right now you see a lot of stuff around bounties. Bounties are a piece of the puzzle, but they're not the whole puzzle. So they're good if you have tasks that have a very specific scope and are limited both in scope and in time. But a lot of the work as DAOs go deeper and deeper into their mission isn't done by, it won't be done by bounties. You need people doing a lot of ongoing work and carrying the context from one need, one mission, one goal, one objective, or one task to the other. So I think we're at that stage now, but soon a lot of DAOs are going to realize that it's not going to work for them, and you're going to see a lot of more long-term work groups coming up, and I'd even venture saying that you're gonna start seeing work groups in a DAO that will work on a DAO-to-DAO basis. So if someone's particularly good, if a group's particularly good at organizing events, you're going to see them come up as a form of revenue for the DAO because they've become specialized in that. And I'm very curious to see the implications in the market because of that.
Can I just pop in and say, wow, that sounds very much like a traditional capitalist economy, but I
Yes.
get it. It's really nice. I get it. It's nice. It's a nice, good
All
idea.
right. My last question is: any advice for people wanting to join a DAO? Don't join a DAO.
Well, my advice is, find one that matches your interests, because then you're probably going to spend some time looking at it, reading about it, and seeing what's going on. That's my main advice.
Yeah. I'm just going to add, go head first. Find one that seems good. If you have a bit of disposable income and it's not too expensive to get in, and just go head first. And it might not work. Like the first DAO that you get into very rarely is the one that you're going to fall in love with. But I think you're going to fall in love with the ecosystem. You're going to fall in love with the potential that's there and with the connections that you make. And eventually going to find a DAO that you actually are passionate about and are passionate about the mission. So just dive into it, really.
All right, we are over time. I just want to thank the Kathy and Mensch. Thank you for being such a cool panel and not agreeing with me on everything. Thank you for that. Enjoying crashing back in the